All right. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Good morning. It's so exciting to have you here. I'm very happy to be welcoming you to this webinar on the National Supportive Housing Compensation Study Analysis that we have worked with Astron Solutions to develop and share with you all. This is neat. It's never really been done before at a national scale for supportive housing, and we think this is critical information for the field. So if you don't know us, first off, I'd say we're this is co-presented with CSH, and CSH is Corporation for Supportive Housing. We're a national nonprofit intermediary, a group that has provided and done technical assistance, policy work, systems change engagement, thought about resources and tools to advance supportive housing and the intersection of housing and health across all sorts of different housing and services to enable stability. We're a CDFI, we lend to projects, and you may know us as CSH, but I'm also excited because today this is a co-hosted event with the National Center for Housing and Health, which is a new resource from powered by CSH, and it is a place where we are hoping to build broader connections between housing and healthcare to advance practical solutions, innovations that can help to accelerate change in this space and kind of transform the way we think about how we relate between housing and healthcare. So this is neat and it's exciting. This is also the place where our research body is going to be held, and where we'll advance our research and analysis work for a large part. So exciting to be able to offer this through both of these places. So today, the center that we're going to be having, I'm going to pass it over to Stephanie Mercier in just a second, but let me just say a few kind of framing thoughts. So first off, compensation analysis may be new for you, right? It was new for me some years ago, and I was shocked to realize how little I knew about compensation analysis when I started to get into it. And so when I think about a compensation analysis, it's not how much should I get paid, it's how much should I get paid if I work in a specific role in a specific area at a specific time, and how does that relate to other people in my geography, and what's the key job description element. So it's a much more in-depth analysis, and it helps us think about how do we need to retain people, how do we need to support people, what's the value of compensation that we're giving people, is it adequate, are we supporting people in the community. And there have been a lot of concerns about wages in the supportive housing industry, raised by providers, by direct practitioners. And so we want to help the field to think about how to approach that issue with sophistication that you all deserve, right? So that's the focus for today. I will just say as a kicking off point, don't forget that you can ask us questions. So there's a Q&A feature, and you can chat in questions through Q&A that will go directly to my co-facilitators, which will be looking at them. We may address them live during the session if possible, but also if we don't, we may just follow up with you directly in writing afterwards through email. Okay, so all that said, I should introduce myself. My name is Ryan Moser. I'm our Vice President for Strategy and External Affairs. I've been at CSH for 20 years and am in charge of the core leadership team that has been launching the National Center for Housing and Health just in April, too. So happy to be here in both of those roles. And with that, I'll pass it to you, Stephanie.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ryan. And I am just thrilled to have the opportunity to be with you all this afternoon or morning, depending on where you're joining us from, and to share this groundbreaking analysis and study that, as Ryan mentioned, we're really hopeful is going to be a tool for all of us to engage in advocacy and analysis of compensation in supportive housing. So today's agenda, we're going to give you a little bit of framing. I'll share a few thoughts, and then the bulk of today's presentation is going to be done by Jennifer Loftus, who's with Astron Solutions, and her team conducted the study, and she'll tell you a little bit more about her extensive background and expertise, but just really glad that we're going to be able to hear about some of the findings from the study directly from her. And then Dara Weinger is going to join you. Dara is a senior program manager in our Los Angeles office and has a lot of background in economic security and other work related to employment, and has really brought a wonderful perspective to this work too. And she's going to share some closing thoughts with you all about what you might be able to do with some of these results coming next. And as Ryan said, please do feel free to use the Q&A feature to ask us questions. We'll have some time after Jennifer presents to pose some of those questions to her if they're related to the remarks that she's made. And if not, as Ryan said, we'll get to them later on. All right, so why are we doing this? Right? Why did we decide in 2025 engage Astron to help us do this work? And it's because we know, and I'm guessing you know it too, if you've joined us this afternoon, that supportive housing cannot succeed without people, right? It is for individuals who are living in the supportive housing, but also fundamental to it are the delivery of services and supports that we know really help people thrive. And we also know that that work is hard and increasingly harder, right? And while compensation isn't the only thing that makes it challenging, it is a really important part of getting to that strong and supported workforce that we all know is important. And it's part of, as Ryan said, we've launched the center, and one of the pillars of the center is connecting you all with actionable research, right? So not just analysis because we all found it interesting and we stood around and asked ourselves questions, but actual analysis that you can use to do something or to answer a question you might have about your own organization. And because we thought this was so important, CSH actually put our own resources behind it to be able to do the analysis of this study through yield giving, through funding that we were fortunate enough to receive. And we really hope that you'll be able to use the study, that we all will together, to strengthen the infrastructure of supportive housing. And I won't go too in depth into this, right? Because I'm guessing many of you are very familiar, but this falls in the middle of all of the challenges that are facing our field, right? We know in particular, frontline staff are facing challenges. There's threats to Medicaid and other types of funding. We see shifts potentially away from some evidence-based practices, and people are being confronted by new and different administrative and other kinds of burdens, right? And if folks who are delivering services and offering support are also in places of instability, right, that just creates a cycle in which the quality of supportive housing isn't what we all want it to be. And so we hope that this will offer an additional way to get to a place where experienced staff are retained, people have career pathways, and then compensation is increasingly transparent, it's fair, it's sustainable. Funders understand what it takes to be able to allow organizations to offer that, right? Because that's a huge, important piece of this work too. So without further ado, I'm going to get out of the way and I'm going to turn things over to Jennifer, and Jennifer is going to walk you through what we learned from the study.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. And hello, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with you to go over high level our findings, right, from this groundbreaking study. My name is Jennifer Loftus, and I'm one of the founding partners at Astron Solutions, which is a national compensation and total rewards consulting firm. We're headquartered here in New York City, not unlike CSH, but have clients across the country. And the nonprofit sector has always been one that is very close, near and dear to our hearts, and such an important part of our nation. So we're thrilled and honored to be part of this groundbreaking work. Now, as you can imagine, if you've already taken a look at some of the resources, there is a wealth of information there. Literally, we've got hundreds and hundreds of pages of data and spreadsheets and so many things that you can use to make a change in your organization and across the industry as a whole. I've got about 40 minutes, so I promise you we're not going to go through all 200 or so pages of information. But what I will do today is give you a framework to help you access and use the information in that survey effectively, no matter what your purpose is. Then we'll spend a few moments talking about what were some of our key findings from this year's study and our calls to action, right? Where do we go from here? Following that, we'll very, very briefly share with you some total rewards trends that we're seeing across the country, right? Across industries that will impact our findings here, your own experiences as well. We'll also have some key webinar takeaways for you. And then we've got some time at the end for Q&A, but also my colleague Dara has some closing comments, so I'll pass the mic back over to her. We'll have time for that discussion, and boom, our hour will have just flown by. So now I've been in compensation and total rewards for 30 years now. And I have to tell you, every time there is a new survey, I am like this little puppy on the left-hand side here. I am so excited for fresh and new data. It's got that new survey smell, if you will, not unlike that new car, because now we can get in there and see what's happening, what's going on. How does this impact my organization or my clients' organizations? But coming along with a new survey is also a lot of information, and sometimes it can feel overwhelming, right? Where do I look? What do I need to know? What's important, right? And so our charge is to take all of that information that we need to work through and have it make sense, right? Break it down, make it relevant, make it useful, and most importantly, make it actionable. And analysis is key, right? So when you have the survey and you're looking at it, or when I look at a survey, I can't just take a couple of numbers out of that survey and say, well, here it is. I should be paid more. This person is paid too much, right? That doesn't happen too often, but once in a while, right? That's not how it works. We have to actually do some analysis on the data before we can get to that point where we're drawing conclusions and having key takeaways and generating those calls to action. And that's what the first part of my segment here is focused on, right? How do I do an effective analysis of all of this survey data? Now, first, I want to hear from you, and I've actually got 4 polls woven throughout my section here. And this is the first one. I'll launch it in just a moment. But I want to hear from you. How would you rate your own survey analysis skills? Right? So would you say you're an expert? You've been doing in-depth comp or benefits analysis for years? Would you say more you're comfortable using these kinds of surveys? Maybe you sometimes use these surveys and want to know more about what's the best way to do so. Or maybe this is totally outside your comfort zone, and that's okay. We're going to get it within your comfort zone if answer 4 applies to you. Or maybe this is totally brand new and you've never done this before, and that's okay. You are in the right spot as well. So you're going to get lots of tips and tricks and techniques to make the most. All right, so I've launched the poll. I know everybody who's here, why don't you go on ahead and vote, and let's see where everybody is. All right. You know, I'm seeing the responses coming in on this end, and it's, I always feel like I'm calling a horse race, you know, because one will change and then, you know, another more votes will come in and the responses will change. And so let's see, we've been open for about 25 seconds. We've got 70% of you have voted. All right. Can we get the remaining 30%? Let's give it another 10 seconds. Let's see who else will participate. Can we get to 75%? One more person. No, all right. I think we're going to have to go. Oh, all right, there we go. We're up to 77%. 80% have voted. Thank you. Thank you. All right. I'm going to close the poll. Now, hopefully you can see the results, but if you can't, I promise I will share those with you because it may be how I shared my screen. So let me, all right. So can you see? Yes. All right. Dara's giving me the thumbs up. Awesome. Well, here we go. Look at that. Over half of you have never used a survey like this before. It's all new to you. I'm so glad you're here. You're going to have so many takeaways and you're going to be moving up into that expert rank before you know it. And then we've got a nice distribution through the rest. We've got some who are experts. Bravo. Keep me on my toes, please. Some of you who are comfortable, about 8% each there. And then some, you've done it before a little bit, or, you know, maybe I'm okay with it. Maybe I'm a little uncomfortable. Your honesty is perfect. Exactly what I need to know for framing today's conversation. All right. Excellent. So let me just close that window and let me get back over to my slides. And hopefully, if I've done that correctly, you see the next slide that says initial considerations up at the top. All right, excellent. Well, first things to think about after you download that survey, open it up, take a look at it. When you're thinking about how do I use this data, there's really 4 things that you need to consider. First being, who's the audience, right? If you're using this for your own analysis to think about your job or maybe a couple of other jobs, that's going to have a different tone to it, if you will, than if you are presenting to the executive director in your organization or the CFO, right? Or maybe the board of directors or board of trustees of your organization, or perhaps employees, right? So always think about who is the audience, who is going to see the findings and the conclusions that you draw. Second thing to think about is, what is the intended purpose of your analysis, right? So are you doing this to figure out how much of a pay raise your employees should get when the next salary adjustment period comes along? Is it to think about budgets, right? How much do I need to put in my budget for next year? Is it for writing a grant and thinking about what do I need to put in that grant so I can get the salary levels I need to pay my employees appropriately, right? I've named three. There are many different purposes, but always start with the end in mind, right? What do I want to accomplish? And how is this data and how is this survey going to help me do that? The third thing that you need to think about is what we call a total rewards philosophy. And I'm confident for many of you, this is the first time you're ever hearing this phrase. Don't worry, I'm going to talk more about that in just a moment. And also, we've got resources in the survey report for you about it. So you don't have to take notes fast and furious here. You've got a written record of what that is. The fourth thing that you need to consider right from the start is timing, right? So how quickly do you plan to act on your findings from the study, right? Is it going to be in a couple of weeks? Are we thinking about making some change a year out, right? Because salaries are always in motion. That's the good thing and the bad thing about compensation. It's never static, right? It's always changing and usually going up, right? So the longer out that your action items are going to happen, the more you have to build in a buffer for that, right? We'll talk about that in just a couple of slides as well. But always keep in mind, what's your timing for this project that you're working on? All right, so those are four initial considerations. The next thing we need to do is define our market, or in CompSpeak, we would say, what is the relevant labor market? Right? Where do I tend to hire people from? Where do I lose my employees to, right? Or yourself, where do you want to work, right? Think about that. And that's important because, as you'll see in our study, we've certainly got robust information on the supportive housing industry, but we've also folded in some data as a supplement from other industries of relevance, right? So is it all the organizations in your geographic area? Is it all kinds of nonprofits? Is it healthcare, right? Is it only supportive housing? Maybe you have multiple markets that you are pulling from or losing people to. And let me make this a little more complicated here. It may vary depending on the job that we're talking about, right? So perhaps a security guard, that could be from anywhere, but a development or fundraising professional, we're going to think just more broadly from the nonprofit sector as an example. So always think about what is your relevant labor market as you're going into these analyses, because you'll see in the report, we can find very different salary levels depending on the market that we're talking about. And speaking of markets, it's time to hear from you. I've got my second poll here. How does your organization define the market? Right? We probably use that term very casually, but what does that actually mean? Oh, and we've got the poll launched here. Awesome. Thank you. All right. So we've got, are we only looking at our industry, so supportive housing from a national perspective? Are we looking at supportive housing, but also just locally, right? New York City, Chicago, Orlando, wherever you might be. Do we look strictly at geography and not so much at the industry? Or does it depend, right? Depending on the job that we are looking at, we may have multiple market definitions. All right, and look at that. As I've been talking, the votes are coming in fast and furious here. This is perfect. Yeah, I'm so excited that you're excited to share your thoughts on this. All right, I'm seeing some trends. We're up to about half, 60% have participated. Let's give another 10 seconds. And then let's see. All right. And I'm seeing some trends that from a comp perspective, I am not surprised that I am seeing these. All right. So we've got 80%. All right. I think we're good there. So let's end the poll. Let's share the results. Here we go. All right. Over half of you said it depends. And for most organizations that I work with, that is in fact the answer. It does depend, right? Certain jobs will have certain markets, others may be broader in focus, right? So always get that definition up front if you're not sure. Second largest, about just shy of a third of you are saying we're looking at supportive housing, but we're within geography, right? Nationally, not as much of a concern. So we've got to take that geographic focus. And then lesser, we've got broad local market, and then only 4% saying industry, but national focus. Excellent. All right. So that aligns with trends that I do see with other organizations as well. All right. So let's continue on then. Right. So we've done our homework. We've had our initial considerations. We've thought about our relevant labor market. The next thing is to select the data that we're going to use. Now, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. This survey that we've done here, this is an awesome survey. I'm biased, I recognize that, but it meets the qualities of a survey that you would look for, right? And when you're considering a quality survey, you're going to look at who is in that survey. Who are the participants? Do they align with your relevant labor market? Do they align with the size or relevant types of organizations? We're also going to look at job matching, right? So all of our survey jobs have small job descriptions, right? So does your job align, relatively speaking, with that job content? Hopefully it does, right? If not, then I'd say let's look at another survey. You'll also want to keep in mind the size of the responding participants for any given job, because you'll notice in our survey that there are some jobs where we've shared lots of data with you and others where we have stars, right? We're not able to report data. And that's not by accident. It's because of a legal consideration, specifically the Department of Justice antitrust guidelines, which you see here. We could have a separate webinar on that. But basically, these are guidelines from the federal government to prevent collusion or antitrust or price fixing activities. Long story short, we have to have at least 5 organizations reporting data for any particular item for us to show it. Right? So when you see the stars in the survey, that means we didn't have enough respondents. So tell your friends, right? Tell your colleagues for the next time we run the survey, get them participating as well. The more participants we have, the more data we can share with you. Also, you'll notice in that survey, there's different percentiles, and I'll talk about that more in a moment, tied into total rewards philosophy. But think about which do we want, the 25th percentile data, 50th percentile, 75th percentile, which of those aligns with your organization's philosophy? Next, but not least, right, we've got our base pay. So that's someone's salary or hourly rate of pay. That's in the survey. Our survey shows bonus, right? Not many of you use bonuses, and that's not a surprise at all. But you may be interested in something called total cash compensation, where in essence, you'd be adding together base pay and bonus, right? It's a little more thinking down the road, but keep that distinction in mind. And lastly, when you're doing your own analyses, always look at how many sources you're using. Again, this survey, I have full confidence in it. I wrote it with my colleagues here on the webinar and a couple other members of my team here. But best practice would be, let's use a couple of different data sources. And you'll see some of those additional sources as further resources for you in the survey material. So look to make sure you've got a robust selection of data. Now, I promised I was going to talk about total rewards philosophy and percentiles again, and boom, here's the slide. This is also in the report, so I don't want to spend a lot of time because I'm watching the clock and we've got a lot of material to cover. But I want to highlight for you, as you're looking in the survey, you'll notice that we are providing data where legally available at the 25th percentile, 50th percentile, and the 75th percentile. All these p-values here. And each of these align with a different philosophy. Right, so P25 is being a market lag position. We're paying less than the majority of organizations in our relevant labor market. P50, we're matching the market, right? We're not the highest payer, we're not the lowest payer, we're right middle of the road there. And 75th percentile, P75, that's that market leader position. We're paying more than most organizations in our relevant labor market. As you see on this slide, each of these philosophies have strengths and weaknesses or pros and cons. There's no one right answer. Compensation is both art and science, and this is really getting into the art part here. So many times organizations will ask me, well, Jennifer, what's the right philosophy? And it's not like when we were back in school. If you're old like me, you'll remember when you had a Scantron multiple choice test, right, that you had to take. We don't have that here. The right philosophy is the one that enables you to attract and retain the talent that you need while still being financially sustainable, right? That's the sweet spot that you're looking for. And if one of those is out of balance, well, then maybe we need to look at increasing our funding, for example, right, to get those two into balance. So poll number 3, here we go. Thinking about your organization. Does your organization have a total rewards philosophy, or have you said this is the particular point that we want to target in the market? And if you have one, have you looked at it recently, right? In the last year, or maybe it's been a minute or many minutes in this case, or maybe it's informal. The executive director knows it, maybe the CFO, maybe you if you're in HR, and that's about it. Possibly you don't have one. And don't worry if that's you, a lot of organizations don't. But we've got some homework here if we don't. And lastly, some of you, this may not be within your sphere of influence within the organization, so maybe you don't know, right? But there's a homework item for you. Start asking, let's find out, what is our organization's total rewards philosophy? Is it formal? Is it informal? Let's see, we've got 62% of you have voted so far. Can we get 1 or 2 more? All right, we're up to 65, 68%. Yes, all right. So why don't we close the poll here? We're up to 70, 75%, 78%. Oh, bravo. All right, so let's share these results here. And interesting diversity here. 40% of you don't know. And that's okay, right? But now you know, this is something I need to learn more about, right? Something I need to think about. And then we're almost even, right around 20% each for those who don't have one and those who do, right? So this is a typical distribution of what I'll see when I'm presenting to larger groups, where you've got some organizations that have those philosophies and they're buttoned up, but others where we've got an opportunity for enhancement, right? Either to develop one or to check, make sure it's still current, make sure it's still fresh. Perfect. All right. I think our next poll will probably come up right away. So let me stop sharing here, because you've probably guessed what the next poll was going to be. If you know in your organization, what level of the market does your organization target for base pay? So again, someone's salary or hourly rate of pay. And again, if you don't know or not sure, check the not sure box. That's why it's there for you. So let's see, these responses are coming in quickly. All right. Now, the one that's something not listed here while votes are coming in, that is sometimes organizations will say, well, we want to do a blend of P25, P50, or a blend of P50, P75, but my goodness. Oh, I thought we had everybody voting. My apologies. I looked in the wrong spot. I was like 100%. Yay. No, wrong row, Jennifer. All right. Let's see. Let's give it another 10 seconds or so. And this, oh my gosh, this is fascinating, these results. All right. You know what? Let's close this poll as well. And let's share those results. Look at this. We are equally distributed here. All right. So we've got basically a third, and a third of those who do have a philosophy. Some are P25, some are P50, some are at P75. Right. Well, this is so interesting because now let me stop sharing here, because in our survey, what we found, now it's larger sample population, of course, but look at that. About 60% of organizations in our survey said that they matched the market with smaller groups doing P25, P75, and the other category is probably one of those blends. So different mixes, right? You'll find different things, but this is a relatively typical distribution of what I'll see with organizations in the nonprofit sector. All right, next up, we have to adjust our market data, right? Remember I said you can't just take some numbers, pluck them out of the survey and say, boom, here we go. There's possibly three things that we need to do to make sure that we are using data that are relevant for us. The first is thinking about job scope, right? So looking at whether your organization's job description relatively aligns with the job description in the survey. It should be at least an 80% match. And I recognize that's a little subjective, a little gut feel, but you'll know, right? All right, this is basically what our job does. If your job does more or less, maybe you increase or decrease the market data, 5%, let's say 10%. Geography is a big one, right? Because we've got some national data in our survey. We also have some geographic data available, but the additional resources include a lot of different wage differentials that you can use to adjust the data for your specific location, right? Because wages in New York City will be very different than wages in Miami or wages in Phoenix or wages in Los Angeles, for example. You don't want to have a skewed result that's stemming from geography. The report has a much larger discussion on how to do that, a couple of examples as well, so definitely check that out. And the third thing you need to look at is what we call aging. Remember, I said that surveys are compensation is always in motion, but our survey is as of a point in time, and that's September 1st of 2025. So we need to approximate how much we think the data have moved between September 1 of 25 and today, right? This I pulled right from our survey report. It's an example of how to age data forward through time. So that way you're getting as close to the current market as possible, even though you're working with a static resource. All right, now the question often with aging is, well, how much should I age the data by? I've got a couple of data points here for you, right? We've got average, we've also got median or 50th percentile, but looking at how much our organizations increasing their salaries or planning to increase their salaries in 2026. And these are coming from different survey providers. And you'll see I'm just going to ballpark right around 3.5%. Our survey is the bottom two rows on here. Now, this is a year behind, and that's going back to those Department of Justice antitrust guidelines that we can't ask about the current year in a survey, so that's why we're a year behind. But notice, I provided you with two different data cuts here because some of our participants said we're not giving raises, right? For whatever reason, probably funding, right? Can't do a raise. So if we include them in the mix, salary raises, 2.83%. But if we pull out those zeros, notice how that jumps up here on the average to 3.6% and pretty much right in line with our other sources for 26. Right? So always do your research and figure out what is that appropriate aging factor, and also for your own organization's pay raise process as well. Of course, subject to what your contracts will allow. Now, last item before I get into the survey itself is thinking about benefits benchmarking, right? Because our survey also has a number of pages talking about different types of benefits, like health insurance or paid time off, for example. And comp and benefits benchmarking will differ, right? In theory, they're the same kind of approach, but there are certain things that are different. First, when we think about benefits, we tend to have a wider definition of the relevant labor market than we do for compensation. Also, benefits tend to change slower, if you will, than compensation does, right? And if we're thinking about doing changes, benefits are going to be further out, at least a year, maybe even 2 years, right? As opposed to compensation, where we're thinking, 2 months from now, 3 months from now, for example. And there can be a lot of nuance, right, with plan design on health insurance or retirement plans, for example. It's not as cut and dry as compensation can be. And certainly, you probably want to get your employees their opinions, their thoughts on what benefits add value, what makes a difference to them, so that way you can tailor that benefits package accordingly. So you get the most bang for your buck, so to say. Now, from our survey, we asked all of our participants, how much are you spending on benefits each year? Some provided it as a percent of payroll. Others, it was easier for them to give us the actual dollar amount. So you'll see in the box down here, 50th percentile spend about 20% on a percentage basis, or for dollars, it was, basically about $500,000. So you can use that to think about how much is your organization spending on benefits and investing in employees. Now, we've got a few pitfalls here, and in the interest of time, I'm going to move through these very quickly. Most of them are, don't assume, right, free data from random sources on the internet, right? We're not going to use that. We're going to use a trustworthy source like this survey that we're providing you. We're not going to call our competitors for market data because of those Department of Justice antitrust guidelines again. And we want to make sure that we're looking at current job data, job descriptions, and matching based on job content, not job title. Those are the most critical pitfalls to think about for today. Now, about our survey, let's get into some survey specifics here. You can see some findings here where, if I'm thinking about organizations, right, we had 75 participants who have got, at the 50th percentile, 65 employees full-time, 7 part-time employees, 6 volunteers, right? But you'll see in the survey that these numbers can change greatly between median and average. 50th percentile turnover rate, about 20%. These organizations operate in one state, right? So we're not in multiple states. And overwhelmingly, nonprofit organizations are represented here. We did have a couple of for-profits, but primarily nonprofits. And thinking about geography, because we spoke about that when it comes to comp, you'll see starting with the blue slice of our pie, about 40%, if I'm rounding here, from the Northeast, and then working around North Central and the West regions were the most represented in this survey. The South Central and Southeast to a lesser degree, but we've got a nice geographic distribution in the survey. And what kind of community do we operate in? You'll see overwhelmingly, the majority are in urban areas, which intuitively that makes sense, and less in the suburban, and then even less in the rural. But some organizations work across these, so multiple responses were allowed. Budget size, look at this distribution. We are really representing from the smallest organizations up to the largest, with our greatest pocket, if you will, in here from really $1 to $10 million, I'd say, is the core of the survey. But then we've got a number of larger organizations represented as well. So certainly keep that in mind as you're looking at the data and thinking about your organization as well. We also asked a couple of questions to understand the makeup of your employee population. And from a gender perspective, female was the largest with males. And from a racial perspective, our largest employee population category, if you will, Black or African American, and then white, and then Hispanic or Latino. So thinking about this and the possible cross-section of who works for us, do we represent the communities that we serve? And are our pay rates helping these groups or hindering pay equity, right? Social equity, those kinds of things. And what can we do to be a positive force for change in the communities where we work? So some key findings, and the report itself goes into pages of discussion on each of these. We don't have time to get into that long of a discussion. I want to highlight a few of them for you. First, and probably not a surprise to many of you, when we look at the whole survey, the pay for our sector is lagging other relevant labor markets, right? All organizations, healthcare, nonprofits, we have some retail, for example, and that includes executives, and especially in the Northeast US. Our three lowest paid roles turned out to be the front desk staff, administrative assistant, and facilities maintenance staff. And from a hierarchy perspective, that's probably not a surprise, but the key takeaway here is that these roles on average are paid well below a broader market and generally below what we call a living wage, right? What does someone need to be okay, right? Can they afford their rent and their food and these other elements, these essential elements where they live? Report has a lot of data about living wages in different parts of the country, so definitely check that out. Third, bonuses. We don't really use them. They're used sparingly, but there is potential, right, to use them to attract, to retain, to enhance our total rewards packages. Another hot topic in compensation is the CEO to worker pay ratio, right? So how much does the CEO or executive director make? How's that compared to the lowest paid person? And what's that ratio? Ours was 4.43 to 1. Right? So even if I round up, let's say if the lowest person is making $50,000 a year, the CEO would probably be around like $225 a year. And that's very conservative, right? We see other industries where it's 10, 20, 100 times. So very conservative. Our executive director, our top leadership, they're not getting rich, right? Working in supportive housing. The survey also looked at not only what are you currently paying individuals, but also what are your pay ranges or pay structures. And many of our participants didn't have pay structures, even though there's a lot of laws and more momentum in this area around pay transparency. So that's another takeaway to think about and implement. And lastly, when we consider benefits, right, mirroring what we saw on the cash side, our benefits are generally lower than in what's offered in the overall not-for-profit industry. But where's our shining star here? It's paid time off, vacation time, sick time, strong in the supportive housing industry. Now, I recognize this last year and a half or so has been a bit of a whirlwind for everybody, right? We don't quite know what's coming, what's happening next, and where do we go from here, right? So we're concerned, right? How do I do right for my employees, for the people I serve, my stakeholders in this chaotic environment that we're in? Well, here's our calls to action. Let's increase funding and increase the education for our funders on total rewards so we can make meaningful progress on pay and benefits competitiveness. And let's be honest, right? What is our relevant labor market? Is it only supportive housing? Is it broader? And then how does that impact item one, right? Our funding streams that we have and the education that needs to happen. When we are able to make meaningful investments in cash comp, that's going to address potential race and gender biases that may exist in our current pay philosophies and our pay rates. Living wage, right? We had that example of those three lowest jobs. So important that we align. And again, this goes back to what are our funders doing and supporting? And variable comp, let's use some more of that. And let's develop those pay ranges as well. So there's a lot here. My goodness. Yeah, you're probably like, Jennifer, stop, right? Too many trends and things to think about. But let me leave you with these snippets of some total rewards trends that we're seeing across the broader not-for-profit industry. Well, we can't deny the influence of the for-profit market, right? Think about some roles where people can work for you or they could work for Amazon, right, in the warehouse. We can't deny those kinds of instances and the impact on our ability to attract and retain talent. Political landscape, I mentioned it earlier. We'll leave that where it is. Pay transparency, more laws are coming up. Employees are looking for this. We need to be sharing more information on our pay ranges and our pay practices with our employees, and getting back to basics, right? That includes market pricing, like we've just explored, developing job architecture, as we would call it, or career pathing, right? Formalized jobs and levels and evaluating roles. And education and communication are critical for our employees and for our managers as well. For many of you, this is the first time you're seeing something like that, like this, and chances are it is for your teams as well. So this kind of education is critical for their understanding, their success, and by extension, yours as well. My goodness. Well, this has been a quick journey through a couple hundred pages of information. So, and I'm looking at my clock. We're right on time here. So I know we'll have time for some Q&A, but also I'm going to pass the microphone on the stage here over to Dara for some closing comments. So let me stop sharing. Dara, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. This presentation, just thank you for walking us through the trends and the findings. I know Ryan said it before, but it's true for me too, that I got a very deep education through this process and reading through the report. So thank you for helping to set the stage and really create this data-informed environment. There's no Q&As at the moment, but I would really encourage anyone who's got some unanswered questions to please type them in, and Stephanie and Ryan and I can follow up with you afterwards. If you have anything burning that you want to be addressed. Just in closing, I think what we're hoping that this work enables is a shift in how organizations approach compensation, going from a reactive space to a more strategic place. And we find that with better data and tools, that leaders can build more transparent and consistent approaches to pay, and then help make stronger decisions about how to invest in their teams. Ultimately, this supports more stable and resilient workforce. And that stability really directly translates to how our tenants and communities have outcomes and how they are in their health and wellness in that journey. As an employee in supportive housing, you can bring this data to broaden the conversation around compensation to your organization's leadership. It's a great starting place for conversation. Or if you're already having that conversation in a strategic planning session or cycle, then maybe there's opportunity to reevaluate and bring more information and have a data-informed conversation. Next slide, please. We're all operating in this just really awful moment of true uncertainty. There's policy changes, there's funding constraints, ongoing workforce burnout, and all at the same time, we know that supportive housing works. This effort in building out the study and having these tools, it's an effort to help the field hold the line on what is proven and what is effective. When organizations are better equipped to support and retain their staff, then they can sustain those models in what we know makes a difference. Let's move forward. Forward on a shared path forward. I think finally, this work reflects something bigger. It's a shared responsibility across providers, across funders, and across systems leaders. Strengthening the workforce isn't something any one organization can solve alone. But with these tools, the right tools, with data, with alignment and policy advocacy, we can really move toward sustainable and supportive workplaces. Because in the end, lasting housing outcomes depends on lasting teams. And that's what really this work is all about. So in closing, next slide. I was saying before, it's a starting point. It's not an end point. This report gives us a data-informed foundation to begin making changes, whether it's in our own organization or across the sector. At its core, this is about supporting staff so that they can stay and grow, and all while centering tenants in everything that we do. This is an opportunity here for advocacy and partnering with CSH and the National Center to better align with funding and contracts with the true cost of this work. We we encourage you to stay connected. You have in the links the tools and analysis to help you make the next steps. Our contact information is there, and we are just sending our biggest gratitude again to Jennifer and her team for walking alongside us in this process and making it a really accessible experience. I see we actually do have, do we have a question in the chat?
I think Ryan does. And actually, before Ryan, we turn to you, I just want to say quickly, Dara, thank you so much for that too. And to Jennifer, I put a link in the chat earlier in the presentation that takes you directly to the materials. And there are three things that you will find at that link. So one is the full report that Jennifer referenced, which walks through a really nice executive summary, some of the key findings, and then also lets you go deep, right? Look at the actual survey results and walk through that. We also, because we really wanted this to be data you can use, Astron also produced an interactive Excel version of that same data that is also accessible via that link. You can go in and say, okay, here's the role I'm thinking about. Here's how much I'm thinking about paying it for it, and select some options for what you want to compare that to so that you can directly see, okay, if I did this, would it align with our organizational philosophy of paying at P50? Would it be over or under for the region that I'm in? So I encourage folks to reach out to us if you're interacting with that tool, if you're having struggles. I'll put the contact email for the center in the chat again. It's something we haven't done as much of before, but we really were so pleased that Astron and Jennifer's team member John in particular was able to produce it, because we're hopeful that it will be a useful resource to you all. So happy to be in conversation about it. And there's also a two-page overview from kind of CSH's perspectives about what we think about some of these takeaways too. So another version of that executive summary. So encourage you to explore those, connect with us about them. And like Dara said, we see this as the beginning of the work. And so we're really excited to continue the dialogue with you all. And I think, Ryan, sorry, back to you. Wanted to make sure folks knew the resources. And I think you had a question for us.
That's great. Thanks, Stephanie. There's two. So one is more of a comment than a question, but a comment from one person is really appreciate Jennifer's presentation and how she made it digestible to understand. I would love to hear more from her and those and related to these themes. So for that person in particular, again, do reach out through Stephanie. And if you'd like to connect with Jennifer in particular, she's posted her LinkedIn account on the chat, so you can connect with her and ask her direct questions. I know Jennifer; she's very, very kind and welcoming. So jump in, and we'll continue to look for ways to bring out parts of this analysis and think about implications in different ways through CSH and the center to share more information around it. Second question was from somebody saying, I work in supportive housing and I don't think I make enough money, and I've tried to advocate with my boss, but they say there's nothing they can do because the contract limits how much they can pay me, right? So what can I do about that, right? So that's a really hard spot. And it kind of goes to something we've had a lot of discussions about in this as we're developing this piece, which is a lot of times in the nonprofit sector, government contract rates or grant funding rates set sort of limits or the available cash that we can use to pay people, that we can use for compensation and benefits, sometimes very directly, sometimes in really specific ways, right? And so there's some truth to that. But that should, again, also be a starting point, not an ending point, right? So when I think about that conversation and having sat in that seat now some years ago where I didn't understand why I was making as little money as I was and didn't understand whether or not I was making less money than I should or whether or not that was actually what everybody was making around me, first piece is that the information can be helpful. So you can use that chart the Excel sheet that Stephanie has had to just find out, like, are you being paid less than other people in your local community? How does your compensation? You can look up the contract rates that you have, right? And try to inform yourself about how the public sector is financing. It can be an opportunity for alliance between workers and the managers, right? To be able to say, how do we advocate together to increase rates? There's been some great advocacy, for example, through the Supportive Housing Network in New York that has done pay advocacy with the Human Services Coalition to get cost of living allowances passed by the state so that they could pass those down through their to the staff that work in the organizations to be able to improve living conditions, wages, right? So I think there are lots of ways that you can think about how to use information. Jennifer, is there anything in what I said or something you'd like to add from a different lens related to that?
Oh my gosh, you've covered a lot of ground right there, and I agree. You probably saw me nodding there. I agree with all of those. The other one item that I would add, and this is more for executive directors or CFOs or presidents of organizations, is to think about if we do also have private funders, right? What more can we do perhaps on the development or the fundraising side to fill a gap where our contracts are not budging, or maybe they're giving a 1% COLA, something like that? Do we have alternative sources of funding that we can tap into potentially to bolster, right, the salary and benefits levels of our employees? And then also, I talked with a number of clients recently, and they say, are we really getting everything out of our contracts that we're entitled to, right? So there's another homework item, right? Understanding, is there more in the contract that we could be getting that maybe we're not even accessing right now, and then distribute that right through compensation as well. So a couple additional thoughts, but Ryan, you were spot on there.
It's great, Jennifer. Thank you. And I would, last thing I'd say is just education, always inform yourself. That's always my number one goal. Figure out what I don't know and learn more about it so that I can be a better, stronger advocate for myself, the people I care about, the community, right? I think don't assume that other people know the information that you don't know too, right? So there are a lot of people that work, even probably some people in HR that don't have full understanding of compensation analysis, right? And how to think about those pieces. So help share information. Policymakers often don't understand the impacts of what the policies and how things are being reached. So use it as a resource. Reach out to us if you like help in doing that. I want to thank Stephanie and Dara, and really particularly Jennifer and John at Astron Solutions. Thank you for this wonderful work that you've done. I'm going to drop in one last comment and just say, if you've enjoyed the webinar today, if you'd like to learn more, please come visit us at the National Center for Housing and Health. I've dropped the link in there. You can join our mailing list, be ready for this and many other new resources, and join us for future events and opportunities. So thank you all very much, and we'll go ahead and wrap up now. Have a great afternoon.